At the meeting about my late son's will, my daughter-in-law asked me to leave the room. "This matter doesn't concern you. The inheritance is for those who truly loved him," she said. I obeyed and left the room in silence. 30 minutes later, I heard the gold digger screaming. The truth in the will left her in shock. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this and comment the city you're watching from. I'm Matthew, and I'm 63 years old. Today I learned that even in death, my son could still break my heart. The law office smelled like leather and disappointment. I sat in the waiting area, my hands trembling slightly as I gripped the arms of the burgundy chair. 24 hours had passed since we buried David, my only child, and here I was, about to hear his final words through a legal document I never thought I'd need to understand. Vanessa walked in like she owned the place. My daughter-in-law had always carried herself with that particular brand of confidence that comes from knowing you're beautiful and using it as a weapon. Even in her morning attire, she looked polished, calculated. Her black dress was designer, her makeup flawless, despite the tears she'd shed at yesterday's funeral. "Matthew," she said, with a nod that felt more like dismissal than greeting. I stood up, my knees protesting after sitting too long. "Vanessa, how are you holding up?" She gave me that look, the one I'd seen countless times over the past 8 years of David's marriage. It was a mixture of pity and disdain, as if I were a stray dog that had wandered into her pristine world. "I'm managing," she replied, her voice crisp. "David would want me to be strong." The lawyer, a thin man named Peterson with wire-rimmed glasses, emerged from his office. "Mrs. Miller, Mr. Thompson, please come in." As we settled into the chairs across from Peterson's mahogany desk, I couldn't help but notice how Vanessa positioned herself slightly ahead of me, as if establishing dominance even in this solemn moment. She pulled out a tissue and dabbed at her eyes, though I hadn't seen any actual tears. "Before we begin," Peterson said, adjusting his glasses, "I want to express my condolences. David was a good man, and I know this is difficult for both of you." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. David had been more than good. He'd been everything to me. After his mother died when he was 12, he became my entire world. Maybe that was part of the problem. Peterson opened a thick folder. David's will is straightforward in most aspects, but there are some specific instructions he wanted followed to the letter. Vanessa leaned forward slightly. She'd been asking about the will since the day after David's heart attack, subtle at first, then more insistent. I'd found it odd how quickly her grief had turned to practical concerns. "The estate is substantial," Peterson continued. "Between the life insurance, the house, investments, and business assets, we're looking at approximately $2.7 million. I felt the air leave my lungs. I knew David had done well with his consulting firm, but I had no idea he'd accumulated that much wealth. Vanessa's eyes lit up for just a moment before she composed herself. "Of course, there are also some personal items and sentimental pieces to consider," Peterson added, glancing between us. "I think we should get to the main provisions," Vanessa said, her voice taking on an edge of impatience. "This is hard enough without dragging it out." Peterson nodded and began reading. As he spoke about bank accounts and investment portfolios, I found myself thinking about the last conversation I'd had with David. It was 3 weeks before his heart attack, and he'd called me on a Tuesday evening. "Dad," he'd said, his voice sounding tired, "I've been thinking about Mom lately." "What about her?" I'd asked, surprised. David rarely brought up Sarah anymore. "Just how much you loved her, how hard it must have been when she died." There had been something in his tone, something I couldn't quite place. Before I could ask him about it, Vanessa had called him away from the phone, and we'd never finished that conversation. "Mr. Thompson?" Peterson's voice snapped me back to the present. I realized he'd been speaking to me. "I'm sorry, what?" I was explaining the provisions regarding personal effects and family mementos. Vanessa shifted in her chair, and I caught a flash of something cold in her expression. "Actually," she said, interrupting Peterson, "I think Matthew should step outside for this part." I blinked, confused. "I'm sorry?" She turned to face me fully, and for the first time since I'd known her, she dropped all pretense of politeness. "This doesn't concern you, Matthew. The inheritance is for people who actually love David." The words hit me like a physical blow. Peterson looked uncomfortable, his pen hovering over the papers. Mrs. Miller? I'm not sure that's... He abandoned David when he was just a boy, Vanessa continued, her voice rising slightly. Always working, never there for school plays or baseball games, or when David needed him most. Do you know David had to take 3 buses to get to his own high school graduation because his father was too busy with work? My heart started pounding. That wasn't true. I'd been there in the back row, watching my son walk across that stage with more pride than I'd ever felt in my life. But David had told her I wasn't there? Why would he lie about that? Vanessa, please, I said quietly. I know I wasn't perfect, but nothing. She stood up, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood floor. David told me everything, Matthew. How you made him feel like a burden after Sarah died, how you'd rather work double shifts than spend time with him, how you never once told him you were proud of him. Each accusation felt like a knife twisting in my chest. The worst part was that some of it was true. I had worked constantly after Sarah died. I had struggled to connect with David emotionally. But I'd hoped he understood that everything I did was for him. The inheritance should go to people who were actually there for David, Vanessa said, crossing her arms. People who loved him unconditionally, not people who saw him as an obligation. Peterson cleared his throat. Mrs. Miller, I really think Mr. Thompson should remain for the full reading. There are specific instructions. No. Vanessa's voice was final. I won't sit here and pretend that this man deserves to hear about David's final wishes when he couldn't be bothered to care about David's living ones. I looked at Peterson, hoping he would insist, but he seemed to wilt under Vanessa's glare. My chest felt tight, like someone was squeezing my lungs. Maybe she was right. Maybe I didn't deserve to be here. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling unsteady. I'll wait outside. As I reached the door, Vanessa called after me. Matthew? I turned, hoping for some small mercy, some acknowledgement that maybe she'd gone too far. Don't wait around, she said. This might take a while. I stepped into the hallway and closed the door behind me. Through the thick wood, I could hear muffled voices but couldn't make out words. I sank into the same burgundy chair I'd occupied earlier, my hands shaking more now than they had before. For 30 minutes I sat there, replaying every moment of David's childhood I'd missed, every opportunity for connection I'd let slip by. The secretary occasionally glanced at me with sympathy, but said nothing. Then I heard it. A scream, sharp and sudden, followed by what sounded like papers scattering across the floor. Then Vanessa's voice, high and panicked, shouting something I couldn't understand. The door to Peterson's office burst open and Vanessa stumbled out, her face white as bone, her perfectly styled hair disheveled. She looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, fear mixed with something that looked almost like terror. Peterson appeared in the doorway behind her, holding what looked like a sealed envelope. Mrs. Miller, please, we need to finish. No, she whispered, backing toward the exit. No, this can't be right. She turned and ran from the office, leaving behind only the echo of her heels and the faint scent of her expensive perfume. Peterson looked at me, his expression grave. Mr. Thompson, he said quietly, I think you'd better come back in. I followed Peterson back into his office, my mind reeling from what I'd just witnessed. Papers were indeed scattered across his desk, and one of the leather chairs was overturned. Whatever had been in that envelope had shaken Vanessa to her core. Please, sit down, Peterson said, righting the fallen chair. There's quite a bit we need to discuss. As I settled back into my seat, I couldn't stop thinking about the terror in Vanessa's eyes. In all the years I'd known her, I'd never seen her lose composure like that. She was always in control, always calculating her next move. Mr. Thompson, Peterson began, gathering the scattered papers, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. What was your relationship with David really like? The question caught me off guard. What do you mean? Mrs. Miller painted a very specific picture of you as a father, but frankly, some of the things David wrote in his final letters don't align with her version of events. Letters? David had written letters? My heart started racing. I don't understand. Peterson pulled out a file folder thicker than the one containing the will. David came to see me 6 months ago, not just to update his will, but to leave very specific instructions about what should happen after his death. He was quite thorough, and he seemed troubled by something. I leaned forward, desperate to understand. Troubled how? He asked me several times if our conversations were completely confidential. He seemed afraid that someone might try to interfere with his final wishes. Peterson removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly. "Mr. Thompson, I've been practicing law for 32 years, and I've never had a client seem so concerned about potential manipulation of their estate." The word manipulation hung in the air between us. I thought about all the times Vanessa had answered David's phone when I called, all the visits that somehow got canceled at the last minute, all the family gatherings I wasn't invited to because David was too busy or not feeling well. "Can you tell me about David's childhood?" Peterson asked. "Specifically after his mother died?" I took a deep breath, my mind traveling back to those dark years. Sarah passed when David was 12. Cancer. It took 2 years, and by the end, we'd spent everything we had on treatments that didn't work. Peterson nodded, making notes. "And after?" "I had to start over. I was 35 years old with a son to raise and medical debt that felt insurmountable. I took a job at the steel mill, working the night shift because it paid more. Then I picked up weekend work at a construction company. That must have been difficult. Didn't begin to cover it. I'd sleep for maybe 4 hours during the day, then get up to make sure David had dinner and help him with homework before I left for the mill. On weekends, I'd take him with me to job sites when I could, but most of the time, I had to leave him with Mrs. Patterson next door." "Mrs. Patterson?" "Our neighbor. She was in her 70s, but she loved David like a grandson. She'd make him lunch and help him with school projects. When he got older, she'd drive him to baseball practice or school events when I couldn't." Peterson was writing faster now. "So you weren't absent by choice?" "Never." The word came out sharper than I intended. Every extra hour I worked was to put money away for David's college fund. Sarah had made me promise that no matter what happened to her, I'd make sure David got an education. I remembered those conversations with Sarah during her final weeks. She'd grip my hand with what little strength she had left and make me swear that David would have opportunities we'd never had. "I worked 3 jobs for 6 years, I continued. Mill work at night, construction on weekends, and I started doing small engine repair in the garage during my free time. Mrs. Patterson used to joke that I was trying to work myself to death. Did David understand why you worked so much? That was the question that had haunted me for decades. I thought he did. I tried to explain that everything I was doing was for him, for his future, but he was just a kid who'd lost his mother and barely saw his father." Peterson set down his pen. "Mr. Thompson, did David ever express resentment about your work schedule?" I considered the question carefully. "Not directly. He was a good kid, never complained, but I could see it in his eyes sometimes, especially when I'd miss something important. His 8th grade science fair, a baseball game where he hit his first home run. I'd promised to be there, and then the foreman would call with overtime or an emergency job. How did he react to those disappointments? He'd just nod and say he understood, but I knew he was hurt. I paused, remembering one particular evening when David was 14. I came home from a double shift at the mill, and I found him sitting at the kitchen table with his report card. Straight A's, as usual. I was so tired I could barely keep my eyes open, but I told him how proud I was. "And?" He looked at me and said, "You don't have to pretend, Dad. I know you're too tired to care." Then he went to his room. The memory still stung after all these years. I should have followed him, should have made him understand that I was never too tired to care about him, but I was so exhausted, and I had to be back at work in 6 hours. Peterson nodded sympathetically. "When did things improve financially?" "When David was 18. I'd finally paid off the medical debt and saved enough for his first 2 years of college. I was able to cut back to just the mill job, but by then," I trailed off. "By then it was too late?" "By then David was focused on school and his girlfriend, and we'd established this pattern where we loved each other, but didn't really know how to connect. I'd spent 6 years being the provider instead of the father, and I didn't know how to switch back. Peterson pulled out another file. "Mr. Thompson, I'm going to ask you about some specific events. David mentioned them in his letters, and I want to understand what really happened." My stomach tightened. "Okay. His high school graduation. Were you there?" The question surprised me. Of course I was there. I took the day off work, which meant losing a day's pay I couldn't afford. I sat in the back because I was wearing my work clothes and didn't want to embarrass him, but I watched him walk across that stage. Peterson frowned. "You're certain?" "Absolutely. I still have the program somewhere at home. I was so proud of him, getting into state university with a partial scholarship." I paused. "Why? What did David say about it?" "According to what Mrs. Miller told me today, David said, 'You didn't attend.'" The words hit me like a punch to the gut. That's not true. I would never have missed that. What about his college move-in day? Another memory I treasured. I rented a truck and drove him to campus myself. We loaded up all his things, and I helped him set up his dorm room. His roommate's parents were there too, wealthy folks with a new SUV. I felt out of place in my work boots and old jeans, but David introduced me proudly as his dad. Peterson was taking more notes. "And you maintained contact during college?" "I called him every Sunday evening. We'd talk for an hour or more about his classes, his friends, his plans. When he was a sophomore, he told me he wanted to start a consulting business after graduation. I offered to help however I could." "Did you?" "I co-signed his first business loan, $25,000. It was a risk for me financially, but I believed in him." I smiled sadly. "He paid it back within 2 years. I was so proud when he called to tell me the business was profitable." Peterson set down his pen and looked at me directly. "Mr. Thompson, I need to be frank with you. The version of events Mrs. Miller described today is very different from what you're telling me. According to her, you were an absent, uncaring father who resented David's existence. That's not true." My voice was barely above a whisper. I'm beginning to suspect that. But the question is, why would David believe it was true? The implication hit me slowly. If David believed I hadn't cared about him, if he thought I'd missed his graduation and abandoned him emotionally, then someone had convinced him those things were facts. "Mr. Thompson," Peterson said quietly, "when did David start dating Vanessa?" "About 9 years ago. He brought her to Christmas dinner, said he'd met her at a business networking event." "And how did she interact with you initially?" I thought back to those early meetings. She was polite, but distant. She'd make little comments about how independent David was, how he'd learned to take care of himself. At the time, I thought she was complimenting his maturity. But now? Now I'm wondering if she was planting seeds. The realization was starting to dawn on me, and it made me feel sick. She was rewriting our history, wasn't she? Peterson didn't answer directly, but his expression told me everything I needed to know. Instead, he reached for that thick envelope, the one that had sent Vanessa running from the office in terror. "Mr. Thompson," he said, his voice grave, "I think it's time you learned what your son really thought about you." Peterson's hands trembled slightly as he opened the thick envelope. I could see several smaller envelopes inside, each one labeled in David's familiar handwriting. My heart pounded so hard I was sure Peterson could hear it across the desk. "Before I show you these," Peterson said, his voice careful and measured, "I need you to understand something. David came to me 6 months ago and he was deeply distressed. He discovered something that had shaken him to his core." I gripped the arms of my chair. "What kind of something?" "Evidence that his wife had been systematically lying to him about you for years." Peterson pulled out the first envelope, labeled, "For Dad," to be read. First, he spent weeks investigating, trying to understand how much of his life had been built on deception. The room felt like it was spinning. Investigating? David was a thorough man, as you know. When he started questioning Vanessa's version of events, he didn't just accept doubt. He dug deeper. Peterson handed me the envelope. He wanted you to read this first, in case something happened to him before he could tell you the truth himself. My hand shook as I opened the envelope. David's handwriting, precise and familiar, filled 2 pages of his personal letterhead. "Dad," it began, "if you're reading this, then I'm gone. And I never got the chance to apologize to you in person. I don't know if sorry is a big enough word for what I've done, but it's all I have. I had to stop reading for a moment. My vision was blurring, and my chest felt tight. Peterson quietly pushed a box of tissues across the desk. I need you to know that everything I believed about my childhood was wrong. Vanessa showed me pictures, told me stories, convinced me that you were absent and uncaring during the years after Mom died. She had explanations for everything. Why you missed my graduation. You were working overtime instead of coming. Why you never attended my baseball games. You told her you found them boring. Why you seemed distant. You resented having to raise me alone. I felt like I was going to be sick. None of those things were true. Not a single one. I believed her because she was so convincing, and because some of the loneliness I felt as a kid seemed to fit her narrative. I was grieving Mom and confused about why you worked so much. When Vanessa explained that you simply didn't want to be bothered with me, it hurt, but it also gave me someone to blame for the pain I was feeling. I set the letter down for a moment, my hands shaking too badly to continue. Peterson, I need you to know, I never said any of those things to Vanessa. I never told her I found David's games boring or that I resented raising him. I know, Peterson said quietly. Keep reading. I picked up the letter again, steeling myself for whatever came next. 3 months ago, I was cleaning out the garage and found a box of your old things that Vanessa must have missed when we moved. Inside were newspaper clippings from every single one of my baseball games, even the ones I thought you missed. There were programs from my school plays, my graduation ceremony, even my college orientation. You kept everything, Dad. Every single thing. My throat closed up completely. I'd saved every article, every program, every reminder of David's achievements. When Vanessa had helped him move his things after our relationship became strained, I'd assumed he'd taken them. I never thought to mention them. But the thing that destroyed me was finding your work schedules from when I was in high school. You'd written notes on them, marking my games and school events. I could see where you'd requested time off, where you'd arranged your shifts so you could be there. You were at my graduation, weren't you? You were at my games. You were there for everything that mattered. I had to stop reading again. The pain in my chest was overwhelming, but it wasn't the crushing weight of guilt anymore. It was the sharp ache of understanding just how much damage had been done to both of us. I confronted Vanessa about the box. At first, she tried to explain it away, said you probably kept those things out of obligation, not love. But when I pressed her, when I showed her the work schedules with your handwritten notes about my events, she broke down and admitted the truth. Peterson leaned forward. Mr. Thompson, are you able to continue? I nodded, though I wasn't sure. I was ready for whatever revelation was coming next. She told me she'd been lying about you from the beginning. She said she could see how much I loved and respected you when we first met, and she was jealous of that relationship. She wanted to be the most important person in my life, so she started telling me things that would make me question your love for me. The words on the page blurred as tears filled my eyes. All those years of believing my son thought I'd failed him. All those missed opportunities for reconciliation because I thought he resented me. She admitted that she intercepted phone calls from you, that she threw away letters you sent when we were first married. She told me you called her once, crying, begging her to help you understand why I was pulling away. Instead of helping, she told you that I needed space and that you should stop trying to contact me so much. I remembered that phone call. It was about 4 years into David's marriage, and I'd been heartbroken by how distant he'd become. Vanessa had been so understanding on the phone, so sympathetic. She'd assured me that David just needed time to adjust to married life, that my constant calls were making him feel pressured. Dad, I called you 17 times in the past month, trying to work up the courage to tell you what I'd learned. But every time I tried to speak, I realized how much pain my believing her lies must have caused you. How do you apologize for 8 years of treating your father like he doesn't matter? How do you explain that you were stupid enough to let someone convince you that the man who worked 3 jobs to put you through college didn't love you? The final paragraph was the hardest to read. I'm changing my will tomorrow. Vanessa thinks she's going to inherit everything, but she's going to discover that actions have consequences. Everything I have, everything I've built, it's all going to you. You earned it by being the father I was too blind to appreciate. I love you, Dad. I always have, even when I was too confused to show it. I just hope I get the chance to tell you in person before it's too late. Your son, David. I set the letter down and buried my face in my hands. Peterson waited quietly while I tried to process what I'd just learned. My son had loved me. He'd figured out the truth. He'd tried to call me, but I'd been too afraid of more rejection to answer calls from numbers I didn't recognize. There's more, Peterson said gently. David left very specific instructions about what should happen when the will was read. I looked up, wiping my eyes. What kind of instructions? Peterson pulled out another envelope, this one labeled Evidence. Lee. David documented everything once he learned the truth. Phone records showing blocked calls, emails Vanessa had deleted from his account, even recordings of conversations where she admitted to her manipulation. Recordings? Your son was thorough, Mr. Thompson. Once he realized the scope of Vanessa's deception, he started gathering evidence. He wanted to make sure that if something happened to him, the truth would come out. Peterson opened the evidence envelope and spread its contents across his desk. Phone bills with highlighted calls, printed emails, and what looked like a small digital recorder. This recorder contains approximately 6 hours of conversations between David and Vanessa over the past 3 months. Conversations where she admits to lying about you, where she tries to justify her actions, and where she reveals information that I believe you need to hear. My hands were shaking again. What kind of information? Peterson's expression grew even more grave. Mr. Thompson, I need to ask you something, and please think carefully before you answer. In the months before David's death, did Vanessa ever mention anything about his health? Any concerns about his heart or stress levels? The question seemed to come from nowhere. Not that I remember. Why? David's heart attack was sudden, but according to his medical records, he'd been experiencing symptoms for several weeks before his death. Chest pains, shortness of breath, episodes of dizziness. I felt a chill run down my spine. Are you saying? I'm saying that David confided his symptoms to Vanessa, and according to these recordings, she discouraged him from seeing a doctor. She told him it was just stress from work and that medication would help him more than doctor visits. Peterson pressed play on a small digital player. David's voice filled the room, tired and worried. I really think I should see Dr. Martinez. These chest pains are getting worse. Then Vanessa's voice, dismissive and irritated. David, you're being paranoid. You're 36 years old and in perfect health. You just need to relax and stop letting your father issues stress you out so much. But what if nothing? You're fine. Take some aspirin and stop being such a hypochondriac. Peterson stopped the recording. The silence in the room was deafening. Mr. Thompson, Peterson said quietly, there are 5 more recordings like that one. Each time David expressed concern about his health, Vanessa dismissed it and discouraged him from seeking medical attention. I stared at the digital player, my mind reeling. Are you telling me that she... But I'm telling you that David's final instructions included a request that these recordings be turned over to the appropriate authorities if anything happened to him. Peterson gathered the papers back into the envelope. He was starting to suspect that Vanessa's interest in keeping him away from doctors wasn't just about avoiding medical bills. The full implication hit me like a freight train. Vanessa hadn't just stolen my relationship with my son. She might have stolen my son's life. Peterson looked at his watch. Mr. Thompson, David's will includes one final instruction. He wanted Vanessa to hear his actual final wishes in your presence. He wanted her to understand that he knew the truth, and he wanted you to see her reaction when she realized her deception had been discovered. I thought about Vanessa's terrified expression when she'd fled the office earlier. She already knows, doesn't she? She knows about the will change and the letters, but she doesn't know about the recordings. Peterson's expression was grim, and she doesn't know that David's instructions included contacting the medical examiner's office about the circumstances of his death. My blood ran cold. What are you saying? I'm saying, Mr. Thompson, that your son may have left us more than just a will. He may have left us a case. Peterson reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a manila folder marked Confidential D. Miller Investigation. My hands had stopped shaking, but my heart was still racing as he opened it to reveal what looked like a private investigator's report. 2 months before his death, David hired a private investigator, Peterson explained. He wanted documented proof of everything he was beginning to suspect about his wife. I stared at the folder, afraid to ask what was inside. What did he find? More than he bargained for. Peterson pulled out a photograph and slid it across the desk. It showed Vanessa entering what looked like an upscale restaurant with a man I didn't recognize. This was taken 6 weeks before David's heart attack. I picked up the photograph, studying the man's face. He was older than David, well-dressed, and the way he had his hand on Vanessa's back suggested this wasn't a business meeting. His name is Richard Stavros. He's a cardiologist at Presbyterian Hospital, and he's been having an affair with your daughter-in-law for over a year. Oh. The words hit me like a physical blow. A cardiologist? Yes, and before you ask, yes, David knew about the affair. The investigator documented dozens of meetings between them. Peterson pulled out more photographs, each one showing Vanessa and this Dr. Stavros in various intimate situations. But that's not the most disturbing part. I set the photographs down, not sure I could handle any more revelations. What else? Peterson opened another section of the file. Dr. Stavros has been under investigation by the medical board for overprescribing cardiac medications to patients who didn't need them. Specifically, drugs that can cause heart problems in healthy individuals when used improperly. My mouth went dry. I think David suspected that his wife was getting medical advice from her lover about how to accelerate his health problems. Peterson's voice was barely above a whisper. The investigator found evidence that Vanessa had been crushing tablets and adding them to David's coffee for weeks before his death. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. She was poisoning him? Slowly and carefully. Dr. Stavros knew exactly which medications would cause the symptoms David was experiencing and exactly how much to give him to make it look like natural heart problems. Peterson pulled out a plastic bag containing what looked like prescription bottles. David found these hidden in Vanessa's car. The medications were prescribed to fake patients using Dr. Stavros's credentials. I stared at the evidence, my mind struggling to process the magnitude of what I was seeing. David knew all this and didn't go to the police? He was planning to. The investigator's final report is dated 3 days before David's death. According to the timeline we've reconstructed, David confronted Vanessa the night before his heart attack. Peterson pulled out a transcript of what appeared to be a recorded conversation. This is from the final recording David made. He activated his phone's recording app during their argument. He pressed play, and David's voice filled the room again, but this time he sounded angry and heartbroken. I know about Richard, Vanessa. I know about everything. Vanessa's voice was cold, calculating. I don't know what you're talking about. I found the pills. I found the fake prescriptions. I know you've been poisoning me. There was a long pause. Then Vanessa's laugh sent chills down my spine. You can't prove anything, David. And even if you could, who would believe you? Your own father doesn't even love you enough to return your phone calls. He loves me more than you ever did. I figured that out too late, but I figured it out. Really? Then why haven't you called him back? Why haven't you told him about us? Because deep down, you still believe everything I told you about him. David's voice cracked with emotion. I believe it because I was an idiot. Because I let you convince me that the man who worked himself nearly to death to give me a future didn't care about me. He didn't care, David. He was relieved when you moved out. He told me so himself. That's a lie. Everything you've ever told me about him was a lie. The recording quality changed as if the phone had been moved. Then Vanessa's voice again. But now it was venomous. You want to know the truth, David? The truth is that I never loved you. I loved your potential. I loved what you could give me. But you're weak, just like your pathetic father. I'm filing for divorce tomorrow, and I'm going to the police about what you've been doing to me. Vanessa's laugh was cruel. No, you're not. Because tomorrow morning, you're going to have another one of those chest pain episodes, and this time, you won't recover from it. The recording ended there. Peterson and I sat in silence for several moments, the weight of what we'd just heard settling over us like a suffocating blanket. That was recorded 12 hours before David's heart attack, Peterson said quietly. The medical examiner's preliminary report shows levels of cardiac medication in his system that were far above therapeutic levels. I felt tears starting again, but this time they were tears of rage. She murdered him. Yes, Mr. Thompson, I believe she did. Peterson gathered the evidence back into the folder. David's final instructions were very specific. If anything happened to him, this evidence was to be turned over to the police immediately. He also left a sealed letter confessing everything he discovered and requesting a full investigation into his death. I stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. Outside, life was continuing normally. People were walking down the sidewalk, cars were passing by, the sun was shining. But inside this office, I just learned that my son had been murdered by the woman he trusted most. Why didn't he just leave her? I asked, my voice hoarse. Why didn't he come to me for help? Because she'd spent 8 years convincing him that you wouldn't care. Even after he learned the truth about her lies, a part of him still believed that you'd rejected him. Peterson's voice was gentle. David was planning to leave her, Mr. Thompson. The investigator's report includes evidence that he'd been quietly moving money out of their joint accounts and consulting with a divorce attorney. She found out? We believe so. The divorce attorney David consulted has confirmed that someone called his office the day before David died, asking about their consultation. The caller claimed to be David's assistant, but the attorney now believes it was Vanessa. I turned back to Peterson, my anger crystallizing into something cold and focused. What happens now? Now we follow David's instructions. The police have already been contacted, and a detective will be here within the hour. Dr. Stavros has been arrested on the prescription fraud charges, and he's already starting to talk about Vanessa's involvement. Peterson stood up and walked around his desk. Mr. Thompson, there's something else you need to know about the will. I'd almost forgotten about the will in the wake of everything else. What about it? David left everything to you. The house, the business, the life insurance, all of it. But he also left specific instructions about what he wanted you to do with Vanessa. What kind of instructions? Peterson handed me another envelope, this one sealed with wax. He wanted you to have a choice. You can pursue full criminal charges against her, or you can accept a plea agreement that would send her to prison for a minimum of 15 years. I stared at the envelope. What's the difference? A full trial would be public. Everything would come out, including the details of how she manipulated your relationship with David. It would be painful for everyone involved. Peterson's expression was grave. But David also understood that you might want justice more than privacy. I thought about Vanessa's face when she'd run from this office, terrified and desperate. I thought about all the years of believing my son didn't love me, all the nights I'd lain awake wondering what I'd done wrong as a father. She stole 8 years from us, I said quietly. 8 years when David and I could have been close, could have been a real family again. Yes, she did. And then she stole the rest of his life. Peterson nodded. The choice is yours, Mr. Thompson. David trusted you to decide what justice looks like. I broke the wax seal and opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with David's handwriting. Dad, if you're reading this, then Vanessa's crimes have been exposed, and she's facing the consequences of what she's done. I know you're probably feeling angry, and you have every right to be. She stole our relationship, and then she stole my life. But I also know you're the kind of man who believes in mercy as well as justice. I paused, hearing David's voice in my head as I read his words. Whatever you decide, I want you to know that I forgive you for any mistakes you think you made as my father. You were never the problem, Dad. You were the solution. You gave me everything I needed to become the man I was, even when I was too stupid to see it. I love you, and I'm sorry we didn't have more time. Make the choice that will let you sleep at night. Your son, David. I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. Through the window, I could see a police car pulling into the parking lot. Mr. Peterson, I said, my voice steady for the first time all day. I know exactly what David would want me to do. Detective Sarah Chen was younger than I'd expected, but her eyes held the kind of sharpness that comes from years of seeing the worst in people. She spread David's evidence across Peterson's conference table like pieces of a puzzle that finally made sense. Mr. "Thompson," she said, looking up from the recordings, "your son did remarkable work documenting this case. Most murder investigations don't come with this level of evidence." Murder. The word still hit me like a physical blow every time I heard it. "Dr. Stavros is already cooperating fully," Detective Chen continued. "He's admitted to providing the medications and giving Vanessa instructions on how to administer them. Apparently, she convinced him that you were abusive and that David was too afraid to leave the marriage." I shook my head in disgust. Even in her affair, Vanessa had been manipulating and lying. "Where is she now?" I asked. "That's actually why I need to speak with you. Mrs. Miller hasn't returned home, and her car was found abandoned at the airport. We believe she's attempting to flee, but she made a crucial mistake." Detective Chen pulled out her phone and showed me a bank transaction record. 3 hours ago, she tried to access David's business accounts. The bank flagged the transactions as suspicious since the account holder is deceased, and no probate court has authorized her to access the funds. She tried to steal money from David's business, attempted to transfer $850,000 to an offshore account. The bank stopped the transaction and called us immediately. Detective Chen's expression was grim. "She's desperate, Mr. Thompson, and desperate people make dangerous decisions." As if summoned by her words, Peterson's secretary knocked on the conference room door. "Detective Chen, Mrs. Miller is here. She's in the parking lot, and she's asking to speak with Mr. Thompson." My blood ran cold. He came back. Detective Chen was already moving toward the window. "Stay away from the glass," she instructed, pulling out her radio. "I need backup at the Peterson Law Office immediately." I could see Vanessa's car parked haphazardly across 2 spaces, the driver's door still open. She was standing beside it, her perfect composure completely shattered. Her hair was disheveled, her makeup smeared, and she was gesticulating wildly while talking on her phone. "Can you hear what she's saying?" I asked. Detective Chen cracked the window slightly. Vanessa's voice drifted up, high and panicked. "I don't care what you promised me, Richard. The money is frozen, and there are police everywhere." There was a pause, then her voice became shrill. "Don't you dare hang up on me. This is your fault too." She threw her phone against the car with such force that the screen shattered. Then she turned toward the building and screamed, "Matthew, I know you're in there. We need to talk." "She's having a complete breakdown," Detective Chen observed. "Mr. Thompson, I need you to stay here while I go down and attempt to bring her in peacefully." But Vanessa wasn't done. She reached into her car and pulled out what looked like a thick manila envelope. "You want to know the truth about your precious son?" she shouted toward the building. "Come down here, and I'll tell you what David was really like." Despite Detective Chen's instructions, I moved closer to the window. Vanessa was waving the envelope like a weapon, her face twisted with rage and desperation. "He was weak," she continued screaming, "just like you. He cried like a baby when I told him how pathetic his father was. He begged me to help him understand why you never loved him." Each word was designed to wound, but instead of pain, I felt something unexpected. Pity. This woman was so consumed with her own lies that she'd convinced herself they were truth. Detective Chen's backup arrived within minutes. 2 police cars pulled into the parking lot, and officers began positioning themselves around Vanessa's vehicle. She noticed them immediately, and her voice became even more frantic. "You can't arrest me! I haven't done anything wrong! David was sick. He had heart problems. It's not my fault he died." Detective Chen spoke into her radio, then turned to me. "Mr. Thompson, she's asking to speak with you. I can't recommend it, but if you're willing, we could arrange a controlled conversation. Sometimes getting suspects talking helps us understand their full involvement." I thought about David's letter, about his request that I make the choice that would let me sleep at night. "I'll talk to her." 10 minutes later, I found myself sitting across from Vanessa in Peterson's conference room, Detective Chen positioned discreetly in the corner. Vanessa had been handcuffed, but she was no longer screaming. Instead, she was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of hatred and something that might have been fear. "You destroyed everything," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You and your pathetic need for David's attention." I studied her face, looking for any trace of remorse, any acknowledgement of what she'd done. I found nothing but self-pity and rage. David loved me, she continued. Before you started interfering, before you made him doubt our marriage, he loved me completely. I never interfered in your marriage, Vanessa. I barely saw David for the last 8 years, because I made sure of that. The words exploded out of her before she could stop them. Because I knew what would happen if he spent too much time with you. Detective Chen leaned forward slightly, but said nothing. What would happen? I asked quietly. He'd remember. Vanessa's composure was cracking again. He'd remember how much he used to worship you, how he used to talk about you like you were some kind of hero. I couldn't compete with that, so you decided to destroy it instead. I decided to protect my marriage. She was getting agitated again. David needed to grow up, to stop living in this fantasy where his daddy was perfect. I helped him see the truth. The truth was that I loved him more than my own life. Here, Vanessa laughed, but it was a hollow, bitter sound. Love? Is that what you call working all the time, missing his childhood, making him feel like a burden? I worked to give him a future. Everything I did was for him. Everything I did was for him too. Vanessa's voice was rising again. I made him successful. I helped him build his business. I gave him confidence. You gave him poison. The word hung in the air between us. Vanessa's face went white, and for a moment she seemed to realize what she'd admitted to. That's not... I didn't... She stammered. We have the recordings, Vanessa. We have the evidence. We know what you did. Detective Chen spoke for the first time. Mrs. Miller, you have the right to remain silent. I'd strongly suggest you exercise that right and wait for your attorney. But Vanessa was beyond rational thought now. He was going to leave me, she screamed. After everything I did for him, after I made him into someone important, he was going to throw it all away because of you. Because he learned the truth about what you'd done. The truth? Vanessa's eyes were wild now. The truth is that David was nothing before he met me. He was just another sad little boy missing his daddy. I made him into a man. You made him into a victim. I made him into a success. And when he started believing your lies again, when he started thinking that maybe his daddy really loved him after all, I had to protect what we'd built. Detective Chen stood up. Mrs. Miller, you're under arrest for the murder of David Miller. As the detective began reading Vanessa her rights, she turned to me with one final desperate attempt at manipulation. Matthew, please. We can work this out. We can split David's estate. You don't understand how much I loved him. I stood up slowly, my legs shaky, but my voice steady. Vanessa, I understand exactly how much you loved him. The same amount you loved me. The same amount you loved anyone who couldn't give you what you wanted. What's that supposed to mean? It means you never loved David at all. You loved what he could do for you. And when that wasn't enough anymore, you killed him. For the first time since I'd known her, Vanessa had no response. No manipulation, no lie, no cruel comeback. She just sat there, handcuffed and broken, as the weight of her actions finally seemed to register. As Detective Chen led her toward the door, Vanessa turned back one last time. You think you've won? But you haven't. David spent 8 years believing you didn't love him. 8 years thinking his father was a failure. You can't get that time back, Matthew. I took that from both of you, and you'll never get it back. Odd. It was her final attempt to wound me, her last desperate effort to maintain some control over the narrative. But as I watched her being led away in handcuffs, I realized she was wrong. She hadn't taken those 8 years from us. David's love had survived her manipulation. His final letters proved that. His investigation proved that. His will proved that. Vanessa had stolen our time together, but she hadn't stolen our love. That had endured even in the darkness she'd created. And now, finally, the truth was in the light where it belonged. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of David's house, my house now, watching the sunrise through the window he'd installed specifically to catch the morning light. The coffee maker gurgled softly, the same sound that had greeted him every morning for the past 5 years. The trial had ended 3 weeks ago. Vanessa received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Dr. Su. Stavros got 25 years for his role in the murder and the prescription fraud scheme. The media had covered it extensively, calling it the perfect murder that wasn't, and a son's final gift to his father. But I didn't think about the headlines anymore. I thought about the letters. After Vanessa's arrest, Detective Chen had returned all of David's personal effects to me. Hidden in his home office, behind books on business management and financial planning, I'd found a shoebox containing dozens of letters he'd written but never sent. Letters to me spanning the entire 8 years of his marriage. The earliest ones were angry, full of hurt and confusion about why his father didn't seem to care. But as the years progressed, the tone changed. By the time he met Vanessa, the letters showed a young man desperately trying to understand the distance between us, looking for ways to bridge a gap he didn't understand. The most recent letters, written in the months before his death, were heartbreaking. David had poured out his discovery of Vanessa's lies, his guilt over believing them, his fear that it was too late to repair our relationship. In one letter, dated just 2 weeks before his death, he'd written, "I know now that you loved me the best way you knew how. I know you worked those extra shifts for me, not because you were avoiding me. I know you saved every program and newspaper clipping because you were proud of me. I know you called on my birthday every year, even when Vanessa told you I was too busy to talk. I want to come home, Dad. I want to tell you I'm sorry and that I love you. I just don't know how to start." He never got the chance to start. But in a way, his letters had given us the conversation we'd never had. I poured my coffee and walked to the living room where I'd created a small memorial for David. His college diploma hung on the wall next to a picture of us from his graduation day, the one where I was standing in the back row, beaming with pride. I'd found the photo in his desk drawer, carefully preserved in a protective sleeve. Beside it was his last letter to me, the one Peterson had read at the will hearing, professionally framed. Below that was the newspaper clipping from his business being named Small Business of the Year 2 years ago. I'd been so proud when I'd read about it, but I'd been too afraid of rejection to call and congratulate him. The doorbell rang, interrupting my morning ritual. Through the peephole, I saw Mrs. Patterson, my elderly neighbor from David's childhood. She was holding a covered casserole dish and wearing the kind of determined expression that meant she wasn't taking no for an answer. "Matthew Thompson, you open this door right now," she called. "I know you're in there, and I know you haven't been eating properly." I opened the door with a smile. Mrs. Patterson was 87 now, but she still had the energy of someone half her age. She'd been one of the few people who'd known the truth about David's childhood, and she'd testified at Vanessa's trial about how devoted I'd been as a father. "Good morning, Mrs. Patterson," I said, taking the casserole dish. "You didn't need to bring me anything." "Nonsense. David would have my head if I let his father waste away." She bustled into the kitchen and began examining my refrigerator. "Matthew, this is pitiful. When's the last time you had a proper meal?" I set the casserole on the counter and filled a second coffee mug. "I've been eating fine." Microwave dinners and coffee don't count as eating fine. She accepted the coffee and settled into one of the kitchen chairs. "Now sit down. We need to talk." I'd learned long ago not to argue with Mrs. Patterson. She'd been like a grandmother to David, and now she seemed determined to adopt me as well. "I've been thinking about what David would want you to do now," she said without preamble. "He left you all this money and this beautiful house, but more importantly, he left you a second chance. A second chance at what?" "At living, Matthew. At being more than just the man who works all the time." She reached across the table and patted my hand. "David understood why you worked so hard when he was young. He wrote about it in that letter they read in court. But he wouldn't want you to keep working yourself to death now that he's gone." He was right, of course. Since inheriting David's business, I'd thrown myself into work the same way I had after Sarah died. It was easier than dealing with the grief, easier than facing the empty spaces where my son should have been. "What do you suggest I do instead?" Mrs. Patterson smiled, the expression lighting up her weathered face. "The same thing David was planning to do before that woman took him from us." "Live?" She pulled a folded piece of paper from her purse. "I found this when I was helping clear out David's office. It's a list he made, things he wanted to do when he got his life back." I unfolded the paper, recognizing David's handwriting immediately. The list was titled "After the Divorce" and contained 10 items. 1. Take Dad fishing at Lake Morrison like we used to, 2. Learn to cook Mom's pot roast recipe. 3. Travel to Ireland to see where Grandpa came from. 4. Volunteer at the Children's Hospital. 5. Take Dad to a baseball game. 6. Learn to play guitar. 7. Start a scholarship fund for kids who lost a parent. 8. Take a photography class. 9. Teach Dad how to use a computer properly. 10. Tell Dad I love him every chance I get. I had to set the paper down as my vision blurred. He was going to ask me to go fishing. He talked about that constantly when he was little, Mrs. Patterson said softly. Every time you took him to the lake, he'd come home talking about what a great fisherman his daddy was. I remembered those trips. They were some of the few times I'd allowed myself to relax, to just be a father instead of a provider. David had been so patient, casting his line over and over, even when we didn't catch anything, just happy to spend time together. Mrs. Patterson, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to live for myself. I've spent 40 years living for other people. Then start small. Pick one thing from David's list and do it in his memory. He stood up and moved to the window, looking out at the garden David had planted. He wanted to take you fishing, so go fishing. He wanted to tell you he loved you, so tell him, even if he can't hear you. After she left, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at David's list. The grief was still there, would probably always be there. But for the first time since his death, I felt something else. Purpose. That afternoon, I drove to the lake where David and I used to fish when he was young. I'd brought his fishing gear, found carefully stored in the garage with a note attached, for when Dad and I go fishing again. I cast my line into the water and settled onto the old wooden pier. The lake was quiet except for the gentle lapping of waves against the shore. I thought about David as a boy, so excited to catch his first fish that he'd nearly fallen off this same pier. I thought about him as a man planning to bring me here again after he'd freed himself from Vanessa's web of lies. I miss you, son, I said aloud, my voice carrying across the water. I miss you so much it feels like I can't breathe sometimes. But I want you to know that I'm proud of you. I'm proud of how you fought to learn the truth. I'm proud of how you tried to make things right between us. And I'm proud to be your father. A fish tugged at my line, and I reeled it in slowly, remembering David's excited laughter when he'd caught his first bass in the same spot 25 years ago. That evening, I called Peterson's office and scheduled a meeting. It was time to set up the scholarship fund David had wanted to create. It was time to start living the life he'd planned for us to share. 3 months later, I stood in front of the David Miller Memorial Scholarship recipients, 12 young people who'd lost a parent before graduating high school. Each of them would receive full college tuition, funded by David's estate and managed by a foundation I'd established in his honor. My son believed that education was the key to breaking cycles of hardship, I told the gathered families. He never got to meet any of you, but he would have been proud to know that his legacy was helping young people build better futures. In the audience, I spotted Mrs. Patterson dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Beside her sat Detective Chen, who had become an unexpected friend during the long months of legal proceedings. In the back row, I saw Peterson and his wife, both smiling with approval. After the ceremony, as I shook hands with the scholarship recipients and their families, a young girl tugged at my sleeve. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, with dark hair and serious brown eyes. "Mr. Thompson," she said solemnly, "my sister got one of the scholarships. She says your son was a hero." I knelt down to her level, my throat tight with emotion. "What do you think?" She considered this carefully. "I think he was lucky to have a daddy who loved him so much." "I was the lucky one," I said quietly. "I got to be his father." That night, I sat in David's chair in his study, reading through his letters one more time. Tomorrow, I was flying to Ireland to trace our family's history, the first item I'd checked off his list. Next month, I was starting guitar lessons. In the spring, I was planning to volunteer at the Children's Hospital, where he'd wanted to give his time. I pulled out a piece of paper and began writing my own letter. "Dear David," I began, "I know you can't read this, but I need to tell you some things. First, I forgive you for believing Vanessa's lies. You were looking for answers to pain I didn't know how to help you heal. Second, I'm sorry I didn't fight harder to stay close to you. I was so afraid of being rejected that I stepped back when I should have stepped forward. I paused, thinking about all the conversations we'd never had, all the moments we'd lost. But mostly, I want you to know that I'm living now, really living, not just surviving. I'm doing the things you wanted us to do together, and I carry you with me in every moment. You saved us both, son. Your investigation, your letters, your love, it all saved us. Vanessa thought she could rewrite our story, but she was wrong. Love like ours doesn't disappear just because someone tries to hide it. I sealed the letter and placed it in the shoebox with all of David's unsent letters. Someday, maybe I'd be buried with them. For now, they were my reminder that love endures, even in silence, even in separation, even in death. Outside, the sun was setting over the garden David had planted, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. I thought about him as a boy, as a young man, as the son who'd fought his way back to the truth about his father's love. For the first time in months, I felt peace. Real peace, the kind that comes from knowing that despite everything we'd lost, despite all the years stolen from us, our love had survived, and that was enough. That was everything.